What makes a man crazy enough to join the cops?
You find out, you let me know, huh?
What if I told you the movie that made Clint Eastwood a legend nearly destroyed his career, and may have been watched by a real-life serial killer on opening night? Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? That single improvised line helped launch Clint Eastwood from Western gunslinger to cultural icon. But the story behind Dirty Harry is far more chaotic, intense, and culturally significant than most fans ever realize. What looked on screen like a tightly controlled crime thriller was, in reality, a production marred by injuries, near cancellations, behind-the-scenes revolts, and a controversy that shook both Hollywood and law enforcement to their core. From its casting chaos and real-world crime inspirations to FBI-level research and political backlash, Dirty Harry wasn't just a movie. It was a cinematic revolution, both loved and loathed for the gritty moral questions it posed. Here's the untold story of how the film was made, the havoc it caused, and the legacy it left behind. Clint Eastwood wasn't the studio's first or second choice for the role of Inspector Harry Callahan. In fact, he was a last resort. Originally, Warner Brothers had cast Frank Sinatra as a tough San Francisco cop, with old Blue Eyes ready to wield the infamous .44 Magnum. But when Sinatra suffered a hand injury and couldn't hold the heavy weapon, the studio scrambled. John Wayne declined, calling the script too violent. Steve McQueen wanted rewrites that undermined the story, and Paul Newman dismissed the project entirely as fascist propaganda. Eventually, with nowhere else to turn, the studio remembered the spaghetti western guy, Clint Eastwood. What looked like Hollywood destiny was really a desperate gamble. The movie was more than just fiction. It drew directly from real-life horror. Just 2 years before filming began, the Zodiac Killer had paralyzed San Francisco with cryptic letters, random murders, and chilling threats. Screenwriters Harry Julian and Rita M. Fink based the film Scorpio Killer almost beat for beat on the Zodiac's methods. The real SFPD detective who investigated the Zodiac case, Inspector Dave Toschi, even served as a consultant. The irony was brutal. Dirty Harry portrayed on screen what the actual police had yet to solve in real life. Toschi admitted to feeling both pride and discomfort watching the dramatization of a case that continued to haunt him. The movie's infamous rooftop chase almost became Clint Eastwood's last. Insisting on doing his own stunts, Eastwood attempted a rooftop jump across decaying buildings. The surface collapsed beneath him, and he plunged 12 feet onto a concrete floor, suffering a dislocated shoulder and a bleeding head wound. Remarkably, Eastwood refused hospitalization and kept filming. The blood on his face in the final cut of that scene? It's real. Director Don Siegel, a seasoned filmmaker, nearly didn't survive the shoot either. Professionally speaking, Warner Brothers hated the direction of the dailies, fearing Siegel was making the film too dark and violent. Studio head Ted Ashley flew to the set to fire him. But Eastwood intervened, threatening to walk off the project unless Siegel remained. With Eastwood holding final cut approval, the studio backed down, but tension stayed high. An executive was assigned to monitor Siegel on set, a level of control the director later described as making a movie with a gun to my head. One of the most famous moments in cinematic history. The "Do you feel lucky?" monologue wasn't even in the script. The original scene called for a traditional, lengthy cop speech, but Eastwood felt it was too long-winded. He asked Siegel if he could improvise something sharper. Drawing from his frustration with verbose dialogue in earlier roles, Eastwood ad-libbed the now iconic line. The crew applauded, and even co-star Albert Popple, playing the wounded robber, broke character with a smile. That one spontaneous line set the standard for every action movie quip that followed. Despite SFPD cooperation early in the shoot, over 24 real police officers walked off the set in protest after seeing Harry Callahan's brutal methods. The police union condemned the film as a dangerous distortion of real police work, forced to replace police advisors and extras with actors and private security. The production adapted, and the controversy only helped publicize the film. The .44 Magnum revolver, relatively obscure before Dirty Harry, exploded in popularity after the film's release. Demand spiked so drastically that Smith & Wesson couldn't meet orders. The gun became a pop culture phenomenon and a public safety concern. Law enforcement reported a rise in crimes involving the weapon. with some criminals admitting to being inspired by the movie. Smith & Wesson was eventually forced to limit distribution and tighten sales regulations, proving that a Hollywood prop could wreak real-world havoc. Stunts in Dirty Harry weren't for the faint of heart. The dramatic bridge jump scene, where Harry boarded the hijacked school bus, was actually 3 different high-risk stunts performed by 3 different professionals. Each jump, from a bridge to a truck to a moving bus, and finally onto the bus roof, required precision timing, no green screens, and no safety nets. One stuntman broke his ribs, another got a concussion, but all lived to tell the tale. Harry Callahan was more than fiction. He was a composite of 3 real-life San Francisco inspectors. Dave Toschi offered investigative style and realism. Bill Armstrong brought bureaucratic frustration. And Frank Falzen inspired the take-no-prisoners attitude. The writers followed these men on real calls and were shocked to discover that real police work often surpassed fiction in intensity. Dirty Harry also unintentionally launched the serial killer film genre. Before this, mainstream films rarely dealt with serial killers. But its massive success proved that audiences had an appetite for stories that blended psychological horror with procedural grit. The film directly influenced classics like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and The Silence of the Lambs. Scorpio, the villain played chillingly by Andrew Robinson, was crafted using real FBI profiles. Robinson worked with behavioral analysts and studied serial killer methods, eventually delivering such a disturbing performance that he received death threats. He later confessed to suffering nightmares for years after filming. The movie sparked academic debate as well. A scene in which Harry forces a confession without reading Miranda rights became a key teaching tool in law schools. Professors discussed the so-called Dirty Harry problem, when moral imperatives clash with legal restrictions. Civil rights groups condemned the film. Others praised it for portraying the limitations of bureaucracy in life-and-death situations. Harry's look was iconic, but unplanned. Eastwood simply wore his own clothes, his brown leather jacket, white shirt, and even the holster were personal items. That accidental wardrobe choice became one of cinema's most imitated styles. Costume designers would try and fail to recreate its authenticity. To increase realism, former bank robbers were hired as technical consultants for the movie's heist scenes. These men, having served time, advised actors on how real robbers think and behave under pressure, lending raw authenticity to the film's gritty opening sequence. Controversy followed the movie internationally. It was banned in several countries, including West Germany and the UK, due to a portrayal of police violence and vigilante justice. Australia allowed a heavily edited version. Ironically, bans increased demand, with bootleg copies circulating widely. The hijacked school bus scene in the film's climax was rooted in real cases of child kidnappings from the 1960s. Though it predated the infamous 1976 Chowchilla kidnapping, the writers used psychological consultants to ensure the children's fear responses felt genuine without traumatizing the young actors. Even Eastwood's signature squint wasn't a character choice. It was medical. Years of shooting spaghetti westerns in blinding sunlight damaged his eyes. The squint became part of Harry's look, suggesting constant vigilance and underlying fury. Midway through production, Warner Brothers slashed the budget by 30%. The result? Creative ingenuity. A planned high-speed car chase became a gritty foot pursuit, intensifying the action. The quarry showdown was chosen because it was cheap to film at, but turned out to be the perfect setting for the story's climax. Shockingly, violent crime in San Francisco dipped temporarily after the movie's release. Some criminologists suggested the film scared off would-be criminals who feared running into a real-life Dirty Harry. Others noted an increase in police recruitment, as Eastwood's portrayal inspired many to join the force. The sequel, Magnum Force, was already being written before the first film wrapped. Screenwriter John Milius was so confident in the character's appeal that he started developing the sequel immediately, drawing inspiration from real stories of vigilante groups and police corruption. The politics of the film cannot be understated. Though Eastwood himself distanced Harry from partisan ideology, the character became a lightning rod for debates on law and order. Conservatives embraced the film as a rebuttal to what they viewed as soft-on-crime liberalism and an overly permissive justice system. Liberals, meanwhile, criticized it as reactionary and dangerous, a cinematic excuse for police brutality. The cultural debate got so heated that the term Dirty Harry syndrome was coined by academics and used in political discourse to describe officers or politicians who advocated harsh, often illegal tactics in the name of justice. The film even found its way into Supreme Court discussions and legislative debates about police conduct, use of force, and civil rights. The power of Harry Callahan's persona also impacted how masculinity was portrayed in popular culture. In the 1960s, the action hero was still in flux, caught somewhere between suave spies like James Bond and reluctant gunslingers from the dying days of the Western. Then came Eastwood's Harry, terse, morally complex, and exuding a quiet menace. He wasn't interested in saving the world, just his city. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. His stoicism, combined with that infamous squint and the ever-present .44 Magnum, created a blueprint for a new kind of anti-hero, one who operates in the gray areas, is deeply flawed, but still, somehow, righteous. This template would go on to influence an entire generation of action stars, from Sylvester Stallone's Cobra to Bruce Willis's Die Hard Cop, and even modern brooding vigilantes like Batman. Yet, beneath all the gunplay and gravel-voice one-liners was something more introspective, a deep and often uncomfortable examination of what it means to enforce justice in an imperfect system. Harry Callahan was not a superhero. He was a man pushed to the edge by the very institutions he was supposed to trust. The courts failed him, bureaucrats hampered him, his enemies exploited the rules meant to protect the innocent. So he became judge, jury, and executioner. Not because he wanted to, but because he believed he had no other choice. This moral ambiguity forced viewers to wrestle with the unsettling notion that doing the right thing might require doing something wrong. The film didn't offer easy answers. It asked hard questions. This complexity was perhaps best symbolized in the final scene, where Harry throws his badge into the water after killing Scorpio. It was an ambiguous gesture. Part rejection of the system, part recognition that the system had rejected him. That small act elevated the movie from genre fare to modern tragedy. Here was a man who had saved lives, caught the killer, done what needed to be done, and yet he could no longer see himself as part of the institution he served. That moment resonated with audiences because it mirrored the broader disillusionment of the era. Whether it was Watergate, Vietnam, or economic collapse, trust in American institutions was eroding, and Harry Callahan embodied that erosion. The film's technical achievements also helped solidify its legacy. Lalo Schifrin's eerie score blended jazz, funk, and avant-garde elements to create a soundscape that was both urban and unsettling, perfectly reflecting the decaying moral landscape of 1970 San Francisco. Cinematographer Bruce Surtees employed stark lighting and gritty textures that stripped the city of its postcard prettiness, replacing it with visual rawness rarely seen in mainstream films of the time. The camera work was intimate, often handheld, bringing the viewer uncomfortably close to the action. These aesthetic choices were revolutionary and helped redefine what action thrillers could look and feel like. On a human level, the emotional toll on the cast and crew was significant. Andrew Robinson, who played Scorpio, was so effective in his portrayal that he was typecast for years and even received violent threats from audience members who couldn't separate the actor from his chilling role. Robinson himself later spoke about the psychological strain of inhabiting such a monstrous mindset, admitting that it took him years to fully shake the role. Clint Eastwood, meanwhile, emerged from the film not only as a bigger star, but also as a creative force to be reckoned with. His involvement in shaping the script, defending the director, and making risky performance choices signaled the beginning of his evolution from actor to auteur, a path that would eventually lead to acclaimed directorial efforts like Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. The legacy of Dirty Harry also lives on in the legal world. The film became a staple in criminal justice courses, particularly the infamous scene where Harry tortures Scorpio to extract information about a kidnapped girl. That scene sparked ongoing academic discussions about constitutional ethics and the ticking time bomb scenario. Can violating someone's rights ever be justified if it saves a life? These debates are still held in universities today, proving that Dirty Harry transcended entertainment to become a case study in legal and ethical complexity. In terms of genre impact, Dirty Harry didn't just kickstart the serial killer subgenre. It redefined the entire structure of the modern thriller. Its gritty realism, urban setting, and morally compromised protagonist set the tone for countless films to come. You can see its fingerprints on everything from Seven to Zodiac to Training Day. Even television shows like Law and Order and True Detective owe a creative debt to the groundwork Dirty Harry laid. The way the film framed its narrative, focusing as much on the detective's psychological state as on the crimes themselves, helped birth a new kind of storytelling, one where procedural detail met personal torment. The social fallout from the film was profound. Some police departments reportedly began referencing Harry Callahan types when recruiting or training officers, though the implications were problematic. While the film was a fictional drama, its popularity meant that many viewed its protagonist as a real example of policing. This blurring of lines between art and life raised concerns, especially as reports emerged of officers idolizing Harry's vigilante tactics. Civil rights organizations warned that the film risked glorifying unlawful behavior under the guise of heroism. And then comes the most chilling detail. The Zodiac killer himself may have attended the movie's premiere. According to Inspector Dave Tashi, a man matching the Zodiac's description sat in the back row of San Francisco's North Point Theater, wore sunglasses indoors, and left silently as the credits rolled. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a cryptic letter referencing scenes cut from trailers. Scenes only someone who'd seen the entire film would know. Whether it was truly the Zodiac remains unconfirmed, but the evidence is unsettling. In the end, Dirty Harry wasn't just a movie, it was a powder keg. It reshaped how we view law enforcement, redefined the action hero, and forced audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, violence, and morality. It was messy, controversial, and risky, and that's exactly why it endures. Sometimes the most impactful art doesn't offer comfort, but confrontation. And in the words of Inspector Callahan, you've got to ask yourself one question. Do you feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? If this breakdown gave you a new lens on one of Hollywood's most controversial classics, hit that like button and share your thoughts below.